He left for United States with nothing but a suitcase, a promise, and love in his heart. For years, he worked brutal jobs, skipped meals, and sent every dollar home to the woman he planned to marry, believing he was building their future together. But when he finally returned, successful and ready to start the life they dreamed of, he discovered a shocking truth. She had married another man and used his money to do it. What happened next left the whole village speechless. Welcome to Tales by Sammy, the home of unforgettable stories filled with love, betrayal, mystery, revenge, and powerful life lessons. Every story takes you on an emotional journey that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join the family as we bring you amazing stories that touch the heart and stir the mind. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. When Daniel Brooks left his small village for America, the whole town came out to see him off. In places like theirs, whenever someone traveled overseas, it was seen as a miracle, an escape from poverty, a chance to change not only one life but an entire family's future. Daniel stood beside the old bus station with one worn suitcase, a passport in his pocket, and tears in his eyes. But he wasn't crying because he was afraid. He was crying because of Grace. Grace stood in front of him wearing a simple blue dress, her hands trembling as she held on to his shirt. Her eyes were swollen from crying all night. "You don't have to go," she whispered. Daniel gently touched her face. "I do. If I stay here, I'll keep struggling forever. But if I go, I can build something for us." Grace shook her head. "I don't care about money." Daniel smiled sadly. "Maybe not now, but one day we'll need a home. We'll need security. We'll need a future." He reached into his pocket and brought out a small silver ring. Not expensive, but bought with the little savings he had. "Wait for me," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "When I come back, I'll replace this with a real one." Grace burst into tears and threw her arms around him. "I'll wait forever," she promised. Those words stayed in Daniel's heart long after the bus disappeared down the dusty road. America was nothing like Daniel imagined. The streets were bigger, the buildings taller, and the nights colder than anything he had known. People moved fast, spoke faster, and barely looked at one another. For the first few weeks, Daniel slept on the floor of a cramped apartment shared with 4 other immigrants. They took turns using the kitchen and bathroom. Sometimes there wasn't enough hot water. Sometimes there wasn't enough food. But Daniel never complained. Every morning before sunrise, he worked at a restaurant washing dishes. By afternoon, he loaded boxes in a warehouse. At night, he cleaned office buildings downtown. Some nights, exhaustion made his knees buckle. Still, before sleeping, he would look at Grace's photo and whisper, "This is for us." At the end of his first month, Daniel sent nearly all his paycheck home. He kept only enough for rent and cheap noodles. Along with the money, he sent a message: "For your mother's medicine. Tell her not to worry anymore." Grace called him crying. "Daniel, you need to send this much." "Yes, I did," he replied. "Your family is my family." Grace's mother soon got proper treatment for the illness she had suffered with for years. Grace's younger brother returned to school because the fees were finally paid. Daniel felt proud. For the first time, his pain meant something. Months turned into a year. Daniel became known among his co-workers as the quiet man who never wasted money. When others bought new phones, Daniel kept his cracked old one. When they went out on weekends, Daniel stayed behind to work overtime. When they laughed at his worn shoes, he smiled and kept moving. Every dollar saved was another brick in the future he imagined with Grace. He sent money regularly. Some months it was for groceries. Some months it was for house repairs. Some months Grace said there were emergencies. "My roof is leaking. My brother needs books. My mother has another hospital bill." Daniel never questioned anything. He only worked harder. Whenever Grace apologized for asking, He told her the same thing. You never need to apologize to me. Back home, Grace's life slowly began to change. She no longer worried about unpaid bills. She no longer patched old dresses or skipped meals. She got her hair done in town, bought nicer clothes, and walked with new confidence. Neighbors noticed. Grace is blessed, they said. Her man in America truly loves her. Grace would smile proudly and lift her chin. At first, she still missed Daniel deeply. She counted the days until his return. But comfort has a strange way of changing people. The more stable her life became, the less she remembered what struggle felt like. 2 years later, Daniel still hadn't visited home. Each time he saved enough for a trip, something came up. Grace needed help with rent. Her mother needed surgery. Her brother wanted to start a small business. Daniel postponed his own happiness again and again. I'll come next year, he told Grace. Next year, she repeated, though her voice carried less warmth than before. Sometimes Daniel noticed she ended calls quickly. Sometimes she sounded distracted. Sometimes she forgot to ask how he was doing. But loneliness can make a man ignore warning signs. He told himself she was simply tired. He trusted her because he loved her, and because trust was all he had left. One evening, after finishing a 16-hour shift, Daniel sat alone outside the apartment building under freezing wind. His fingers were cracked from detergent and hard labor. He opened his wallet. Inside was Grace's old photo, edges bent and faded. He smiled weakly. Soon, he whispered to the picture. Just a little longer. He didn't know that back home, Grace was laughing at a restaurant table with a handsome local businessman named Victor, a man who wore gold watches and smelled of expensive cologne. He didn't know Victor had begun driving her home after outings. He didn't know Grace had started comparing two men, one who promised love from far away, and one who offered luxury right now. Daniel looked up at the cold American sky and closed his eyes. He thought sacrifice was bringing him closer to the woman he loved. He had no idea it was slowly pushing her away. By the 3rd year of Daniel's life in America, exhaustion had become normal. He no longer noticed the pain in his back when lifting heavy boxes. He no longer cared that his hands were scarred from hot water and chemicals. He no longer felt embarrassed wearing the same faded jacket every winter. Pain was temporary, he told himself. Love was permanent. Every sacrifice still had one name attached to it: Grace. Whenever co-workers talked about vacations, relationships, or nights out, Daniel would smile and say, "I'm saving for my wedding." They laughed, slapped his shoulder, and called him a lucky man. Daniel believed it too. At night, he often imagined the day he would return home. He pictured Grace running into his arms at the airport, tears streaming down her face. He pictured building a modest house with a small garden. He pictured children laughing in the yard. Those dreams kept him alive. But Grace had changed. The girl who once cried at the bus station was now a woman who enjoyed attention, comfort, and admiration. She had become known in town for dressing well, arriving in hired cars, and speaking with confidence. People assumed America had transformed her life. In truth, Daniel's money had. And then there was Victor. Victor was everything Daniel was not nearby, visible, and effortless. He owned a chain of small businesses, dressed sharply, and knew exactly how to make people feel important. He took Grace to restaurants she had never entered before. He bought her perfume, handbags, and expensive heels. "You deserve better than waiting forever," Victor would say. Grace would protest weakly. "Daniel is working for me." Victor would lean back and smile. "For you, or for a dream that may never happen?" Those words stayed in her mind long after dinner ended. At first, she defended Daniel. Then she began doubting him. Then she began hiding things. Daniel noticed the distance, but explained it away. Sometimes Grace ignored his calls for days. The network was bad, she said. Sometimes she sounded impatient. "I'm busy," she said. Sometimes she asked for money without even asking how he was. Daniel still sent it. He sent money for a new phone after she claimed hers broke. He sent money for home repairs after she said the walls were cracking. He sent money for wedding preparations after she hinted they should begin planning. That message filled Daniel with joy. He worked 3 extra weekends straight. "My wife deserves the best," he told himself. Meanwhile, Grace used part of that money to help pay deposits for a wedding hall. Just not one with Daniel. 6 months later, invitations quietly spread across town. Grace and Victor would marry at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the finest venue nearby. Some neighbors were shocked. What about Daniel? Grace smiled sadly, rehearsed and convincing. "He stopped caring a long time ago," she said. "He barely calls now." Others shook their heads. Some believed her, some did not. But no one contacted Daniel. People fear involving themselves in other people's heartbreak. On the wedding day, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and white roses. Music floated through the air. Guests in elegant clothes laughed over glasses of wine. Grace stood before the mirror in a stunning white gown. For a moment, she stared at her reflection and remembered the silver ring Daniel had placed on her finger years ago. She opened a drawer. Inside lay that old ring. Cheap, simple, faithful. She hesitated, then closed the drawer. A bridesmaid entered smiling. "It's time." Grace straightened her shoulders and walked out. Victor waited at the altar in a tailored black suit, smiling like a man who always got what he wanted. As Grace walked toward him, applause filled the room. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, no one spoke. Far away in America, Daniel was scrubbing kitchen floors during an overnight shift. He paused to check his phone. No missed calls. He smiled tiredly. She must be sleeping. Then he returned to work while the woman he loved said vows to another man. Months passed after the wedding. Grace moved into Victor's large house. Social media filled with honeymoon photos, luxury dinners, and smiling portraits. Still, Daniel knew nothing. He kept sending money because Grace claimed she still needed help settling family debts. He sent one transfer with a message. "I know I've delayed too long. I'm coming home soon. We'll start our life at last." Grace read it and turned off her phone. The truth arrived through someone else. One evening, after a 14-hour shift, Daniel returned to his apartment and found a message from an old childhood friend named Samuel. "Brother, I don't know how to say this. You deserve to know." Attached was a photo. Daniel opened it casually, then froze. Grace stood beside Victor in a white gown, both hands on a knife as they cut a towering wedding cake. Guests cheered around them. Daniel blinked several times. He thought perhaps it was edited, perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps a ceremony for someone else. Then he noticed the ring on her finger, the smile on her face, the joy in her eyes. Real joy, a joy he had not heard in her voice for years. He scrolled further. More photos. Grace dancing with Victor. Grace kissing Victor. Grace entering a luxury car with flowers. Daniel sank slowly into a chair. The room became silent. His chest tightened so sharply he could barely breathe. He reread every message he had ever sent her. "For our future. Soon I'll return. I miss you every day." He checked the dates of his money transfers. Many had been sent after her wedding. He had funded another man's wife. One roommate entered and saw Daniel sitting motionless. "You okay?" Daniel looked up, eyes wet but strangely calm. Then he laughed once. A short, broken laugh. "I am a fool," he whispered. That night he did not sleep. He sat by the small apartment window until sunrise, staring at the city skyline he had hated for years. He cried quietly, not only for Grace, but for the youth he had sacrificed, the years he could never reclaim, the trust that had been buried alive. But when morning came, something inside him had hardened. He opened his banking app, canceled every recurring transfer, deleted Grace's number, removed her photo from his wallet. Then he stood up, washed his face, and went to work. This time, not for love, for himself. The morning after Daniel discovered the truth, the world looked different. The streets of America were the same. The trains still roared. The warehouses still opened before sunrise. The cold wind still cut through his jacket. But Daniel was no longer the same man walking through them. For years, every step he took had been for Grace. Every extra shift, every missed meal, every sleepless night, every dollar. Now there was no Grace. There was only Daniel. And for the first time in years, that had to be enough. The first weeks were brutal. Heartbreak does not leave quietly. Daniel would reach for his phone out of habit, wanting to message her. He would hear songs that reminded him of promises once made. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night with anger burning in his chest. He replayed everything. The excuses, the silence, the lies, the money transfers, the wedding photo. Some nights he wanted revenge. He imagined calling her, humiliating her, exposing her to everyone. But each time, another voice inside him asked, and then what? Would revenge return the lost years? Would it rebuild his dignity? Would it heal the wound? No. So Daniel chose something harder. He chose silence. He chose growth. Instead of sending money away, Daniel began saving seriously for himself. He moved from the crowded apartment into a smaller room. He rented alone. It wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. He studied after work. At first, it was simple things: budgeting, taxes, credit scores, investing basics. Then business operations, logistics, transportation routes, and small company management. His co-workers laughed. Man, when you sleep? Daniel smiled. When I'm successful. He still worked multiple jobs, but now every paycheck built his own future. He repaired his credit, bought a used van, and started taking weekend delivery contracts. He learned to negotiate. He learned to fail. He learned to recover. One client became 3. 3 became 10. Within 2 years, Daniel left dishwashing for good and focused entirely on transport and freight work. He hired another driver, then another, then another. By the 3rd year, Brooks Logistics had contracts with warehouses across the city. The same man who once scrubbed floors at midnight now signed agreements in offices with glass walls. People called him disciplined. They called him self-made. Only Daniel knew the truth. Pain had trained him. Success changed his life, but not his heart overnight. Money bought comfort, better clothes, a reliable car, a clean apartment. But it did not automatically erase betrayal. So Daniel worked on things wealth could not purchase. He exercised regularly. He went to therapy. He rebuilt friendships he had neglected. He attended church sometimes, sitting quietly in the back row. He learned that strength was not pretending nothing happened. Strength was healing honestly. Little by little, the bitterness loosened its grip. One day, he realized he had gone an entire week without thinking of Grace. Then a month, then longer. That was the day he knew he was free. 6 years after leaving home, Daniel booked a one-way flight back to the village. He didn't announce it online. He didn't call anyone for attention. He simply wanted to see the land he had once left broken. When the plane landed, he sat still for a moment, looking out the window. This time, he was returning not as a desperate young man chasing love, but as a whole man carrying peace. He rented a black SUV and drove toward the village roads he knew by memory. Word spread quickly. Daniel is back. The one from America? They say he owns companies now. Children ran beside the vehicle when he entered town. Elders waved from porches. Men who once doubted him shook his hand enthusiastically. Daniel greeted everyone warmly, without arrogance. He had no need to prove anything. Success that must be announced is still insecure. Grace heard the news within the hour. By then, life had punished her in ways gossip never could. Victor's businesses had collapsed after reckless loans and gambling debts. Their grand house was mortgaged. Creditors came often. Their marriage had become a battlefield of blame and resentment. Luxury had vanished. Only consequences remained. When Grace heard Daniel had returned wealthy, polished, and respected, panic and regret rose together. She dressed quickly and rushed to find him. She spotted him outside the old market, speaking kindly with elders and paying for groceries for a widow whose husband had passed. He stood taller than before, stronger, calmer. There was no desperation in his eyes anymore, only peace. Grace approached slowly. Daniel, he turned. For a brief second, the past stood between them. Bus station promises, late-night calls, money transfers, wedding photos. Then it disappeared. Grace, he said politely. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I've wanted to see you for so long. Daniel nodded once. I'm here now. She stepped closer. I made mistakes. He said nothing. I was foolish. I was selfish. Victor ruined everything. I should have waited for you. Still, Daniel said nothing. Her voice cracked. I still love you. Daniel looked at her gently, almost sadly. No, he said. You love what you lost. Grace began to cry openly. Please, can we start again? Daniel's expression remained calm. The woman I loved stood at a bus station, wearing a blue dress, and promised to wait forever. He paused. She no longer exists. Those words struck harder than shouting ever could. An elderly woman nearby struggled with heavy bags. Daniel walked over immediately and carried them to her cart. Then he returned, reached into his pocket, and handed the widow enough money to cover several months of groceries. People nearby watched silently. Grace lowered her head in shame. Daniel turned back to her one final time. I forgive you, he said. Hope flashed in her eyes. Then he continued, but forgiveness is not reunion. He gave a small, respectful nod and walked toward his vehicle. The village children cheered as he opened the door. Some called his name proudly. Grace stood frozen in the dust road, tears on her cheeks, watching the man she once traded away drive into the distance. This time, he was the one leaving. And this time, he did not look back. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more powerful stories.